Okay, so this is part 5, and I'm going to go ahead and do the materials and the animation for the 3D. So the 3D is selected. I'm going to come over here to the materials panel on the right hand side, and I'm going to add a new material. I'm going to go ahead and name this material. I'm going to call it 3D Matte, and we have to remember what are the different properties of this object. And so we want it to have a solid color. That's one. We want it to be glossy and reflective, shiny, and have reflections in the scene. So that's 2 properties. And then we want it to fade out eventually in the movie. We want it to fade away and become transparent and invisible. So that's 3 properties. Okay, so whenever you want to combine shaders over here, you have to use the mix shader. So I did that before when we did the Y object. And we did the mix shader, and we mixed a diffuse for color, and we did a transparent shader. So this one we're going to take it even further. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add in a transparent one here. Actually, let's go ahead and add a mix shader. Okay, so I've added in a mix shader, and that allows me to now have a combination of the 2. So the first one is going to be a transparent shader, and that's going to allow me to fade out and make this 3 go invisible. Okay. The second shader is actually going to be another mix shader, and you can see that by adding in a second mix shader, it now gives me 2 more options for a total of 3. So one will be the transparent, one will be the solid color, and then one will be the glossiness. So here's how we do it. So the first one I'm going to change, the second shader I'm going to add is going to be the diffuse one, and that's going to give us the ability to see it. It's going to give us a solid color. Now in the movie, I made mine be this kind of this bluish, very light bluish color. You guys can go ahead and do something different if you want. Maybe for this demo here, I'll choose a very kind of light, pale orange color here. Okay, so there's my 3D right there. And this does get a little bit more complex. And for my last and third shader, I'm going to change it from none. I'm going to change it to glossy. And glossy, of course, is going to make it be nice and shiny. So let me make this a little bit simpler for you visually. I'm going to go ahead and these little minus symbols here, I'm going to go ahead and do that. That's going to close them. Oops. There we go. Okay, so this is kind of how you want to be looking at your 3D object. So the way I have it set up now, again, is my first shader slot is a mix shader. My second one is then transparent. My third shader is another mix shader. And that mix shader then allows me to bring in 2 more shader slots. So then my fourth one is the diffuse to give it a color, and my fifth and last one here is to make it glossy so that it's actually reflective. Okay, so the first thing I need to do now is I need to make this a solid object. I don't want it to be semi-transparent. So I'm going to come right up here, and I'm going to, you see it's 50% of a factor setting. If I bring it down to 0, you'll see that it's now all transparent, so it's completely hidden. If I bring it all the way up to a setting of 1, or 100%, it's fully using these guys down here, the diffuse and the glossy, so it's 0 transparency because it's 100% opaque. Okay, so that's what I want it to be, because I want it to start off as a solid object before, as it enters my scene here. Okay, so if I go back to my QuickTime player, and I go ahead and I look at when it comes in, so the Z object goes up and disappears, and then the 3D starts coming down, right? And the action is it comes straight down, and then it starts coming towards the camera. Okay, So go back to Blender. All right, so I'm going to take my 3D object and I'm going to go ahead and move it. Back on the y-axis. So it's right about maybe there. That's about as far away as I want it to go. And then I'm going to have it go up on the z-axis. So maybe it's off camera. Okay, something like that. And make sure that I'm on frame 1. And when I'm on frame 1, I'm going to go ahead and press I. And I have to think about what is this object going to do? What are its actions? It's going to change the location, but it's not going to be rotating, it's not going to be scaling, nothing else. So it's just a location keyframe. And you'll notice that up here in the dope sheet, it shows up here. Again, what I'm going to do to get in the habit of is I'm going to come up here and click on the little triangle and collapse it, and it says 3D. And now going across this top row here is where you'll see all of my keyframes. And you can see on frame 1, I have a diamond right here. I'm going to go ahead and press A to deselect all of my keyframes there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and go down in the timeline. I'm going to pause for a second here so I can get some more coffee, and then we're going to go ahead and animate the 3D. Okay, so now I'm going to animate the 3D. I keyframed it up there on frame 1. It's off camera, and now, like I said, I've got my camera view in rendered mode, so that way I can kind of see things as they would show up in the movie. So the Z goes up, and when the Z goes up, I'm going to make the 3D come in right as the Z is disappearing off screen. So I'm going to select my 3D, and I'm going to go ahead and move my 3D down to right about there. So you can see, if I zoom in here, you can see the Z is just leaving and the 3 is just coming in, so that way they're kind of exchanging paths. I'm going to go ahead and insert a location keyframe, and then I'll go ahead and advance my timeline a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and move the 3D down so that it's visually it's centered right about there, and I'll go ahead and keyframe that. I'll then go ahead and advance my timeline a little bit more down here at the bottom, and again I'm just approximating here. I'm approximating because I don't have the dope sheet, and I'm just using my animator's instincts. You guys have the numbers, so just go with your gut, but also go with the numbers that you have in front of you. So I'm going to go ahead and advance my timeline, and then I'm going to go ahead and on the y-axis I'm going to then bring the 3D up to front and center, so right about here. And it's catching a nice little highlight, little glint off of the bevel there, so that's looking kind of cool. Okay, and I'll go ahead and insert another location keyframe. Okay, so let me rewind this, and you can see that it's coming up. It shows itself, it goes down, and then it comes up here. Okay, you will notice that as I go through here, you'll notice that there's a kind of a nasty little shadow happening here on the D. And that shadow, if you look at it really closely, it's actually the shadow of the Z, the plus, the positive in the Z, casting down here on the D here. So I could do a couple of fixes here. What I could do is I could just move my light. On frame 1 I could move the light so it's not casting quite like that. I could also go ahead and go back to the Z object and make it a mix shader object and add in transparency and make the Z fade out over time. I think I'm going to try the simpler of the two, and that's going to be, I'm going to go back to frame 1 and move my light source maybe down a little closer to my camera. Okay, so let's see if that made it any better or possibly any worse. Okay, so the 3D comes in. You'll notice that there's no shadow now casting on it from the Z object, so I'm pretty happy there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save. Alrighty. So now I'm going to go ahead and model and bring in that ground plane there. So I'm going to get back to frame 1. I'm going to press Shift-C to get my 3D cursor back there. And now I'm going to do Shift-A. And I'm going to add in a mesh and make it a plane. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to name this plane. So over here in the top right hand corner where we see all of our objects, I'm going to go ahead and just double click. And I'll just go ahead and call this ground. You can call it ground plane if you want, but I'll just call it ground. Let's see. Let's look at the materials. So let's go to the material panel. Let's go to add new material. I'm going to go ahead and call this ground matte. And again, we have to think about how is this actor being used. Well, first of all, throughout the entire beginning of the animation, it's not there. And then when it fades in. So we know we need a transparency shader. And it's pretty reflective because it's you can see the colors of the cylinders here. They are reflecting slightly, and of course when the lights are going around it is fairly reflective. So that's glossiness, and of course we want the ground plane to have a color. So this is going to be set up almost identical to the as the same as the 3D object. So we're going to come over here and we're going to change our first shader is going to be changed from diffuse into a mix shader. And when we change to a mix shader, we're now going to make our first slot be our transparent slot. And that's going to allow us to fade it in and fade it out over time. Before we do any more, let's go ahead and I'm going to move it downward here. Okay, so I'm moving it down. I'm then also going to go ahead and scale it up. So I'm going to press S and drag out my mouse, and I'm just looking here. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. That looks pretty good. I won't know until I actually get the 3D down there. So let's just see. Let's advance the animation, bring the 3D down there. So just kind of looking at it. The ground plane it's a little too low. I brought it a little too low, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it up a little bit. And the test that you can do is you can go ahead and bring it up, and I would say focus in on the 3D. So look at this. You can see that the ground plane is now, the 3D is going through it. So what I do is I move the ground plane down until I see the very bottom of the 3D. You can see it right there. And then I'll go ahead and move it down just a little bit more. You're not seeing it here in the camera view because I haven't given it a diffuse shader. So I'll show you that in just a moment. But I think that's a good location. Okay, so here's the real test. Back over here to materials, I've got my mix shader, which allowed me to do transparency. And for my second shader here, I'm going to add in another mix shader. And by adding in that other mix shader, and that gives me 2 more slots. So for the third slot here, that's going to be the diffuse. Now you're going to be able to see the ground, and it looks really cool, and you can see the light, and you can see the shadow, and that's awesome. Now for the last shader, where it says none, we want this to be shiny and glossy and reflective. So we're going to add in a glossy shader, and you can sort of see it happening here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save. Okay, so first things first. I'm going to go ahead and give it a color that I want. You guys can choose pretty much any color you want. I think I'm actually going to go with this little bit of the blue one. I'm kind of tired of seeing gray. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a kind of light turquoise blue. Pretty happy with that. So that's my diffuse. So I have now the 2 factor sliders. For instance, let's look at how shiny and reflective we want the ground plane to be. So if we look at the diffuse and the glossy, if we change the factor, if we change it to 0, you'll see that the ground is it's all diffuse. It's not glossy at all, so there's no reflection. If we bring it all the way up to 1, it's now all reflective, and you can see it's now reflecting the 3D. That's basically how you make a pure mirror. So I'm going to go ahead and actually I'm just going to leave it at 0.5. There we go. Good. And that's going to be good. It's a nice mix of the two. Okay, So now I have the transparency slider. So if I bring this all the way to 0, you'll see that the ground plane disappears. And if I bring it all the way to 1, it's now fully in there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring it all the way to pure to 0. So it's completely out of the scene. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to frame 1. And I need to keyframe this. So in frame 1, I'm going to set the factor to 0, which means that it's completely transparent. I'm going to put my mouse pointer over it, and I'm going to press I. And I just inserted a keyframe over this factor here. I'm going to go ahead and save. And here comes my dog to say hi to me, so I'm going to pause for a second. Okay, so I'm back. The dog is fed and watered, so he's okay. Alright, so let me go back to the timeline here. Okay, so in the timeline, the 3D comes down. And that's a problem. The Z is going through the ground plane. So I may have to figure that one out. Okay, so the 3D comes in and it comes to a stop. And this is about where I want the ground plane to come in. So I'm going to go ahead and say that on this particular frame, I'm going to go ahead and say that the factor goes back up to 100%, so it's fully in there. And now I need to re-keyframe this, so you have to put your mouse pointer over this area here that says factor. I'm going to press I, it goes gold, so you know you have a keyframe. And now, so what's happened is, now it's going to go from frame 0, and it's going to go ahead and basically stay in there, and it's coming into the scene way too early. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to put in a middle keyframe. I'm going to say, when do I want it to really come in? And I think I really want it to come in right about as the 3D is kind of sliding in towards the camera. So right about here on the timeline. So I'm just going to come back over here to where it says the factor slider. I'm going to drag this back down to 0% and keyframe that in there, so I. So now I've told it to hold at 0% all this time, not do anything there. Got to see if I could figure out what's going on with that Z after there. It holds, and then it finally starts to come in, and there we are. Okay? Alright, I'm ready to basically now start doing the animated camera movement, and then the lights, and then the cylinders. And I'm going to try to speed things up a little bit so we can keep going here. Okay, I'll go ahead and save. And then there we are. If I don't demo the fixing the Z plane, that's something that I will go ahead and I will show you how to do when I return back from my trip. And that's something we can fix, and we can re-render your animation, and you can see it there. Okay, so don't worry about that. It's just a technical setting that we'll take care of. You can certainly, one easy fix if you want to do it on your own is you could move your ground plane lower than where the Z is, in which case it'll be fine. Okay, but for now, let's not really worry about it at all. Okay, all right, and I'll see you in the next part.